The sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow over the busy streets of Lagos. People hurried home, some chatting with friends, others on their phones, but Nnenna wasn't like them. She walked with the grace of a queen, her head held high, her smile so bright that it seemed to outshine the setting sun. To everyone who saw her, Nnenna was the definition of beauty and power. Men stared as she passed by, their eyes following her like moths to a flame. Nnenna was used to the attention. She had always known that her beauty could get her anything she wanted. But lately, she felt something was missing. The power to control men, to make them do anything for her, was what she truly craved. One evening, as she walked through the market, she noticed something strange, a quiet, older man sitting by the side of the road. His eyes were kind, yet full of secrets, as though he knew things no one else did. Nnenna walked past him, but he called out to her in a soft, almost eerie voice. "You are beautiful, but you have yet to find true power," he said. Nnenna stopped. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Her curiosity grew, and she turned to face him. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart raced. The old man smiled and reached into his bag, pulling out a small worn cloth. "This is the secret to all you seek," he said, his hands trembling slightly as he handed it to her. "It will make men fall at your feet. But beware, it comes at a cost." Nnenna stared at the cloth in her hand. It seemed so simple, so ordinary. How could this cloth change everything for her? But the man's words echoed in her mind. True power comes with a price. She didn't know it yet, but this moment would change her life forever. The next day, Nnenna couldn't shake the thought of the old man and the strange cloth he had given her. Her curiosity gnawed at her, and despite her better judgment, she returned to the spot where she had met him. The market was quieter today. The noise of vendors calling out, the smell of roasted plantain, and the bustling crowd all seemed distant. There he was, sitting in the same spot, his eyes locked onto hers, as if he had been waiting for her. "Did you think about my words?" the man asked without greeting her. Nnenna nodded. "What is this power you speak of?" Her voice was soft, unsure, but there was a deep hunger in her heart for something more, something beyond beauty. The man's eyes twinkled with something mysterious. He gestured for her to sit beside him. "You want men to fall at your feet, to give you their love, their money, their loyalty, no matter what you ask. I can show you how, but you must listen carefully." Nnenna was fascinated. She sat down, her body tense with anticipation. She had always been admired, but this was different. This was about having control, absolute control over men. He spoke in a low voice, as though revealing a secret no one else could know. "There's an ancient charm I can offer you, a charm of power. All you have to do is use it to make men desire you. But there's a rule. You must always use their own personal belongings. And to keep the power strong, you must use their underwear to wipe your face." Nnenna raised an eyebrow, her heart racing. "Underwear?" she asked, confused. The man nodded slowly. "Yes, their underwear. It's the key to unlocking their obsession. They'll be yours completely. But remember this, child. Every power has a price. If you ever use it against your own flesh and blood, you will lose everything." Nnenna was quiet for a moment, thinking it over. But the more she thought, the more she realized that this was the answer she had been searching for. The power to make men worship her was just a charm away. "I accept," she said, her voice steady now, as if she had made a decision she could never take back. The old man smiled, handing her the cloth once more. "Then use it well, Nnenna. But remember, the cost is high." As she walked away, clutching the cloth tightly, Nnenna could already feel the rush of power beginning to swell inside her. Little did she know, this decision would soon lead her down a dangerous and dark path, one where everything she held dear would be at risk. Nnenna's life changed almost overnight. At first, she couldn't believe it. How simple, how easy it was. The first man she used the charm on was Chijioke, a wealthy businessman she'd met at a party. He was handsome, successful, and always surrounded by admirers. Yet, when Nnenna gave him that look, the kind of look only a woman who knew her power could give, he was immediately drawn to her. She remembered the old man's words and slipped the cloth out of her purse, gently wiping her face. She watched, almost in a trance, as Chijioke's eyes glazed over with desire. It was like something snapped in his mind. his attention shifted entirely to her. He offered to buy her anything she wanted, asked for her number, and promised to help her in whatever way he could. That night, she got more than she had ever expected: a new phone, a luxurious dinner, and an offer to travel abroad at his expense. Nnenna was thrilled, but it didn't stop there. Each time she wiped her face with a man's underwear, the same thing happened. It was like a switch inside them turned on, making them obsessed with her. Even the richest men, the ones who had everything, were suddenly willing to empty their bank accounts just to please her. She became a master at it. Men gave her money, bought her cars, showered her with gifts, and even helped her with her businesses. She knew she had power, a power that not only let her live in luxury, but also let her control everything around her. But it wasn't just about the money. Nnenna had men wrapped around her finger. She could make them do anything: liquidate companies, fire employees, even give away their wealth. Nothing was too much. And when they did it, they didn't even question her. They did it for her because they wanted her, needed her. And it made her feel untouchable, like she was invincible. But that invincibility came with something darker, something Nnenna refused to see. As she took what she wanted from the men around her, a shadow began to creep into her life. She noticed people whispering behind her back. Her sister, Chioma, began to question her sudden wealth and the strange things that had started happening at work. Men who once adored her began acting possessive, even dangerous. Still, Nnenna pressed on, thinking she had everything under control. She never stopped to think about what would happen when her power ran out. She never asked herself, how long can this last? Let me know what you think of Chapter 3. It's building up the suspense and tension, with the power growing, but also the first signs of things starting to go wrong. As the days passed, Nnenna's grip on her power grew stronger, but so did the consequences. Kenneth, an oil magnate with a reputation for being cold and calculating, was the latest man to fall under her spell. He was different from the others. He didn't just throw money at her. Kenneth was a man who made things happen. But when Nnenna used the cloth on his underwear, something strange happened. He became obsessed like the others, but there was something more to him. He started calling her constantly, demanding to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. It was flattering at first, but soon it became stifling. Kenneth was no longer a man who simply adored her. He was a man who needed her. And Nnenna didn't like the feeling of being trapped, but she kept her cool, using her charm to get what she wanted. She had him liquidate his entire company to give her everything she could ever dream of: money, assets, anything. Nnenna didn't care how it affected his business or his employees. She just knew it felt good to have him at her feet. She didn't think twice when Kenneth agreed to sell everything, even though it meant that his workers would lose their jobs, that companies would go bankrupt. Then, one day, the walls started to close in on her. Chioma, her elder sister, worked in Kenneth's company, and she had never understood why Nnenna had become so close to him. She had always known there was something off about the way Nnenna behaved around men. Now, her suspicions were confirmed when Kenneth's company began to fall apart. It was chaos, people losing jobs, salaries unpaid, debts piling up. Chioma, who had always worked hard to support her family, was now among the many who were left with nothing. One evening, Chioma confronted Nnenna. "What did you do to Kenneth? Why is his company failing? Why are people getting fired?" she demanded, but Nnenna couldn't explain, couldn't tell her sister that it was because of her charm, the one she had used to control him. The more Nnenna tried to deny it, the more the truth crept in. She had ruined lives, not just for Kenneth, but for everyone connected to him. And as much as she told herself it was worth it, the guilt began to gnaw at her. Her power was slipping through her fingers, and she didn't know why. And then one day, her mother fell ill. The sickness was sudden, the kind that takes a person's strength quickly. Nnenna didn't know what to do. She had spent so much of her wealth, so much of her power, on men who had adored her. But now, when her mother needed her most, she had nothing to give. The sickness was eating at her mother's body, and Nnenna's world was starting to crumble. For the first time in a long while, she didn't have control. Desperate, Nnenna went to the priest who had given her the charm. She needed answers. But when she arrived at his home, she saw something in his eyes, a look of disappointment, like he already knew what was happening. It's happening, isn't it? The priest asked, his voice soft. The power is fading. Nnenna's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't want to admit it, but she knew it was true. Her grip on the men, on the power she had once used so easily, was slipping. Nnenna sat in front of the priest, her heart pounding in her chest. She had felt the power slipping away, but she couldn't bring herself to admit it. Her mother's health was failing, her sister's job was lost, and the men who once groveled at her feet were now starting to withdraw. The charm, the power that had once made her feel invincible, was fading. And she didn't know why. The priest looked at her with sad eyes. He had seen this before. You used the charm against your family, he said softly. You never listened to the warning, did you? Nnenna's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? She asked, her voice shaking. You used their belongings, their underwear, to wipe your face. But when you did that to a man whose family was connected to you, you broke the rule, the priest explained, his voice calm but firm. It's not just about the men you've used. It's about what's happening to your sister. Nnenna froze. She had never thought about the ripple effect of her actions. What do you mean? She asked again, her voice barely a whisper. Chioma worked for Kenneth's company. When you had Kenneth liquidate his business, you caused her to lose her job, and worse, you've drained your own power by indirectly affecting her life. Your sister is part of your family, and you have used this charm against her in a way you never should have. The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. Her sister had lost everything because of her greed. The guilt crushed her chest, but it was too late now. The damage was done. As the priest spoke, Nnenna's thoughts rushed to the time she had tried so hard to avoid sleeping with men from her own state, fearing she might unknowingly be sleeping with a distant cousin. She had taken every precaution to avoid that, but it never occurred to her that her sister's connection to Kenneth could bring her downfall. Now, her powers were gone, just like the wealth and luxury they had once brought her. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. The priest's voice softened, but his words were still heavy. The consequences of your choices are inevitable. And now you must face them. Nnenna felt the weight of everything she had done, the broken relationships, the lives she had ruined, the men who once worshipped her now starting to pull away. She had everything and lost it all. Her mother's health worsened, and she could do nothing to help. Chioma refused to forgive her, and no amount of money or charm could bring her back. In the end, Nnenna sat alone in her empty house, surrounded by the echoes of all the men who had once adored her. They had all recovered. They had moved on. And Nnenna was left with nothing but regret, fear, and the haunting realization that she had brought all this upon herself. Her mother passed away soon after, and the guilt, the grief was too much for Nnenna to bear. She had been given everything she had ever wanted. And in the end, it had destroyed her. As she sat in the dark, her once beautiful face now devoid of the power it once held, she realized that there was no charm in the world that could undo the damage she had caused, and she would spend the rest of her life paying the price.